All right, well, welcome to our first Bible study of the fall semester, 2024. My name is Jefferson, and I'm an alumni here at OSU. A few moons ago, graduated from here. And right now I'm serving as a staff with the club, and also one of the families in the nearby community that would like to have you over. I think, Chris, you're already in my house, right? Is that pretty good? Yeah, okay, good. So yeah, we have a lot of families here that support the club, and we'd like to have you over, especially when you get sick of the dorm food. It's good to have a little home-cooked meal. Okay, so this semester, we're going to cover the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy. Okay, and the title is, Oh, Man of God. And we'll get into that. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'll give you an introduction, because when we get into the Bible, it's, you can read the text, but sometimes when you have some context around it, it makes the content of the books that we read much more meaningful, and actually makes sense. All right? So very important. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up, and a lot of the things that I will be discussing tonight actually will be developed in the later Bible studies upcoming. Okay, so how many here have read 1st and 2nd Timothy? Okay. How many here know who Timothy is? Okay. So there's not that, again, I'm not assuming anything. This is why we have this kind of session. All right? How many of you know who the Apostle Paul is? Okay, good. So these are very important things. The Apostle Paul, he was very instrumental in writing almost half the New Testament. Okay? So God, he was not one of the disciples that was with Jesus. He came afterwards. He was, if you read the book of Acts, you will see his conversion. Okay? But the Apostle Paul, he really saw what was on God's heart. Even when he writes about God's eternal purpose. Okay? So he really saw a lot. And that's why he had a lot to say. He had a lot to write. And a lot of it became part of the New Testament that we have today. So for sure, he was one of the top apostles. And who is Timothy? Timothy was a young brother that in Paul's second journey, Paul did, if you read the book of Acts, he did 3 gospel journeys where he went to preach the gospel, got a lot of people saved, he shepherded them, and they became the church in whatever city they were in. Okay? So he went through one trip, and on his second trip, right at the beginning, in Galatia area, I think it's Lystra or Derbe, he met Timothy, who was a young brother. Okay? He had a Greek father, and his mother was a Jewish. And he actually was a 3rd-generation Christian. His grandma loved the Lord, his mother loved the Lord, and he also got raised up in a godly family. So he also loved the Lord, and he was one serving. So eventually, when Paul met him, he began to follow the Apostle Paul, and Paul considered him like his spiritual child. Okay? And eventually what he was doing is he was kind of like a junior apostle, helping Paul in taking care of the churches and the believers that got saved. Okay? So if you look at you have a little thing here. 1 Timothy 1:2 says, to Timothy, genuine child in the faith. Okay? So, what are the epistles? Epistles or letters? These are basically just letters that the apostles wrote. A lot of them written by Paul. Some were written by Peter. One was written by James. One was written by Jude. 3 were written by John. So these are the epistles. These are all parts of the New Testament. So 1st and 2nd Timothy are 2 letters that Paul wrote to Timothy, his spiritual son. Okay? Now you may say, why did he write these letters? Okay, good. So this is why we need to understand this, to have a full context and have appreciation of these books. The first epistle to Timothy was written by Paul in Macedonia after he got out of prison in Rome and after he visited Timothy in Ephesus. So if you read the book of Acts, at the very end, the Apostle Paul, because of the persecution from the Jews, eventually had to appeal to Caesar. What happened was, he came back after his third journey, and a lot of the Jews were very upset with him because he was a Pharisee. But he turned to Christ and he began to speak. Don't be in the law. You need to be in faith. Receive the Lord. Take in the Spirit. Live by the Spirit. Don't go back to the old law. Don't go back to circumcision. A lot of the Jews did not like that. So because of that, an opposition rose up when he came back to Jerusalem. And there eventually, at a certain point, there were a group, I don't know, I can't remember how many, about 40 or so. They put themselves under a curse that they will not eat until they killed Paul. And when Paul heard that, I was like, uh-oh, I better get out of here. So he had to escape. And they were saying, oh, we just want to ask him a few questions, right? They were not. They weren't going to kill him when he shows up. So he found out about this, and eventually he had no choice. I appealed to Caesar, to the Romans. And because of that, okay, you appeal to Caesar, that means you go to Rome. So because of that, he basically was a prisoner at the end of the book of Acts on a ship voyage going to Rome. And he was imprisoned there. But at a certain point, he got released. And when he got released, he visited Ephesus. That's one of the main cities in Asia, of which, have you heard the book of Ephesians? Guess what? That was his letter to the church in Ephesus. Okay? And Timothy was actually in Ephesus at the time. So Paul visited him. He surveyed the situation. Then he left for Macedonia. Okay? But when he got to Macedonia, he had some burden from what he saw of the situation in Ephesus. Okay? So he wrote to Timothy, and look at what he said here. 1 Timothy 1, 3 and 4. Let me just read to you. Even as I exhorted you, Timothy, when I was going to Macedonia, to remain in Ephesus, in order that you might charge certain ones not to teach different things, nor to give heed to myths and unending genealogies which produce questionings, rather than God's economy, which is in faith. So when Paul was there, he observed the situation with the church in Ephesus. He realized, there's a lot of other kind of teachings going on here. Right? So when he left there, he had a burden. He told Timothy, who was working with him as a junior apostle, Timothy, stay there in Ephesus and make sure you charge certain ones. Don't teach different things. Don't teach myths, stories, genealogies, histories, all kinds of different things which produce questionings, rather than God's economy, which is in faith. Now this word economy is very interesting. Okay? If you read many different translations, some translate it godly edifying. Some translate it God's program of instruction. Some translate it God's work, God's plan, God's arrangement, and stewardship or dispensation. So what does this mean? Because Paul is saying, don't teach anything else except for this. So I think it's important for us to know what this is. What is this economy? And the word economy is basically an anglicized Greek word composed of two things. It's oikonomia. Oikos. Anybody here take Greek? Or no Greek? Okay. Oikos means house. Nomos means law. So you put these two together, it's like a household law or a household arrangement. To do what? So that you can, and actually mothers know this. We have a couple of mothers here, right? There's a certain law of arrangement in your house. And what are you mainly dispensing in your house? Food. Right? The kids come, they're hungry. Guess what? You have a way. You went to shopping, you cooked them all up, and then you dispense the food to the hungry kids. Okay? That actually is economy. So even today, right, we have a bad economy or a good economy. Depends. Are the goods being distributed in a good way? If only the rich people got the stuff and everybody else got nothing, that's a bad economy. That's a bad arrangement. That's a bad distribution. But if everybody got the goods that they deserve and that they are able to afford, then that's a good economy. Good dispensing, good distribution. Okay. We will get into this in more detail, but this is actually very, very important because God's economy is actually His plan of what He wants to accomplish today. And you need to come to our third Bible study to figure out in more detail what that is. So I'm selling that. Okay, what else happened? So he wrote that. He wanted to clarify to to Timothy, Timothy, please make sure they are teaching God's economy. Don't teach all the other things. It's going to cause confusion. It's going to cause questionings, right? Actually, even today among Christians, why are there so many divisions among Christians? You think about it. If we focus on the non-essential things, right? Like in the church gathering, should we have musical instruments? Some people say, no, that's too worldly. Some people say, oh yeah, get the maraca, whatever. Should we use piano or organ? Again, these are all side things. How do you baptize somebody? I heard the other day, there was 60 people got baptized on the campus through some preaching of the gospel. I was very happy about that. But how do you baptize? You baptize it in the river? Or what about in some baptismal in some place? Do you sprinkle? Or do you immerse? Do you go backwards? Or do you go forwards? This seems so silly. People argue about this stuff. There's division among Christians because, no, you cannot baptize like that. You see my point? Eventually, if we pay attention to minor things instead of God's economy, which is in faith, what happens? Christians got divided. Okay? And again, you need to come back the next 2 weeks. We will get into it in more detail. What else did Paul talk about? Paul was very burdened here that the importance of God's economy is for the producing of the church. Okay, so let's read this. I can read to you. 1 Timothy 3:15. Paul says, but if I delay in coming to them, I write that you may know how one ought to conduct himself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and base of the truth. So here is very clear. Timothy, why am I writing this to you? I write so that you would know how one ought to conduct himself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God. Okay? So, again, very important. Now, what happened? 1 year later, after he wrote this, Caesar Nero, all of a sudden, had a very sudden strike, persecuted all the Christians in the Roman Empire. Very, very severely. Okay? And guess what? Paul was considered a ringleader of the Christians. So he was imprisoned. And during that time, eventually he wrote 2 Timothy. And that was actually right before he was martyred. He died eventually in prison. And so 2 Timothy is almost like Paul's last writing before he died. Okay? And what was the main point there? So the last letter that, Paul's intention in writing this letter to Timothy is to inoculate him. You know what inoculate means? I'm here studying medicine, nursing, whatever. Of course, 4 years ago we went through that, right? What the so-called, what am I thinking of? Vaccine. That's an inoculation, right? Supposedly, if you got the disease, it can be deadly. But if you put some vaccine, some inoculation, then when it hits you, it won't hit you so hard. Whether that was very effective or not. But the point is, there's some important things. Measles, right? Polio, all of these things we get vaccines for, inoculation, so that when it hits you, it doesn't kill you. Okay? So what happened? Already, society has degraded. Already, the church has degraded. And Paul is in prison. There's not much he can do. So he's writing to Timothy. Timothy, it's time to man up. He did. Timothy actually was quite, almost a little chicken. he kind of, Paul had to encourage him. Hey, Timothy, maybe take some wine for your stomach because it sounds like you have an ulcer or something. He was encouraging him. He said, Timothy, fan into flame the gift of God in you. Right? God did not give you a spirit of cowardice. He gave you a spirit of power, of love, of sober-mindedness. Come on, Timothy. So in a sense, he was kind of encouraging him, equipping him to do what? Why? Because there's such a decline. Okay? Now, so look at what he said here, 2 Timothy 4:6. For I am already being poured out, and the time of my departure is at hand. So already, he knew, he saw the writing on the wall. I'm going to be gone here soon. And then what else happened here? 2 Timothy 1:15. This you know, and he said, you know what this is, Timothy, right? That all who are in Asia turned away from me, of whom are Phygelus and Hermogenes. What's Asia? Those are all the churches in Asia. Ephesus being the lead one. So in the first letter, he warned them. He said, hey, don't teach the different things. It's going to cause confusion. But eventually what happened? They didn't pay attention. So in the second letter, all who are in Asia, all in Asia, they left. Right? Laodicea, Pergamos, all of these churches in Asia, they all left Paul's ministry. So it's a serious thing to teach different things. Okay? Now, you have to realize actually the background and the atmosphere of society back then and the church is very similar to our situation today. Okay? Let me just read. These are all just verses from 2 Timothy. And let's see if you can relate. 2 Timothy 3:1-4. And Paul was warning Timothy. But know this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boasters, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, implacable, slanderers, without self-control, savage, not lovers of good, traitors, reckless, blinded with pride, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. That sound familiar? That's pretty much the society we live in today. Lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure instead of lovers of God. Okay? And what about in the church? It says here, but the Spirit says expressly that in later times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and teachings of demons. So, seems like a pretty bleak time. Actually, in a sense, if you open your eyes and look around you, we are in bleak times. Right? God's name is blasphemed everywhere. God is mocked. Have you ever watched the Olympics? The opening ceremony? Right there, God was being mocked in open display to the whole world. So this is where we are. Lovers of pleasure, lovers of self, lovers of money, not lovers of good, not lovers of God. So this is where we are. How are we going to overcome? Right? I hope there's a desire within you. Lord, I don't want to be part of this age that hates God. I want to be different. You know what you want to be? You want to be a man of God. That's why Paul eventually writes, but you, Timothy, oh man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and meekness. But to be a man of God, and I think, he's talking to Timothy. I don't think he's excluding women. I think we're all in the same boat. We all can be men of God in this way, okay? Whether you're a man or woman. Right? All of us as children of God should grow up. Right? So when we receive the Lord, we are children. But when there's some growth in life, we become a man of God. And that is what is required for us to overcome the degradation of the age in society and even the decline of the church. So this is actually our burden this whole semester. We will cover item after item of the things that you need to equip you, to inoculate you against the decline of society, against the decline in the church, so that we can be men of God who are participating in the building up of God's church. Y'all ready for this ride? Okay. And again, we will go through many, many details. I'm just giving an overall view, right? So that's all I have today. Maybe we can read the focus together. The focus. In a time of the church's degradation, the Lord needs to raise up some men of God who will overcome the decline and uphold the truth of God's economy to build up the church.